So over the past few weeks, I've been seeing a lot of clips about Randy Travis again. Oh, such an amazing musician. And of course, people are talking about how remarkable it is that he's still touring after the stroke he had that literally almost took his life. And almost every headline says something, some similar version to the country legend who lost his voice. And I totally get why people say that. And from the outside, that's what it looks like, or from the surface, if you will. But every time I hear that kind of a headline, I find myself thinking, I don't believe actually that's the story. Because if you dig into it, I don't think that Randy Travis actually lost his voice. I think he lost one way of expressing it. And those are two very different things. And what he did after he lost his voice, that's absolutely fascinating. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, I'm Leezá Steindorf. And for more than 20 years, I've worked with leaders and organizations, families, communities, helping people navigate change and conflict and the moments in life when everything they thought they could rely on suddenly shifts. And as a grief educator, I've also learned something that I don't think we talk about nearly enough. Some of the deepest grief we'll ever experience doesn't come when someone dies. It comes when a version of ourselves does. So if conversations like these help you see yourself differently or the people around you more clearly, I'd love to have you subscribe and join me here each week for these conversations. So back to Randy Travis. Let's start with the facts. He suffered a massive stroke. The doctors were not sure he would even survive. And he had to learn how to walk again. He had to learn how to talk again. And the damage affected his ability to speak. And all of the functions that most of us take for granted became super complicated and difficult for him. And the voice that carried him through decades of music and that we all recognize as soon as it comes on the radio or on our music platform, that deep resonant bass and twang changed, gone. And most of us stop the story there. And that makes sense, right? Because if someone spends their entire life becoming known for one extraordinary gift, and then that gift is suddenly taken away or is gone, what else are you going to say? But that's the part that keeps pulling my attention, because if you look at it, that's not where his story ended. Actually, it's where a completely different story began, and it's fascinating. So I wonder if that's not why so many people are drawn to him today. Not because he overcame impossible odds. We've heard stories like that, and they're always inspiring. I'm not minimizing that at all. But I think it's because, whether we realize it or not, his story reminds us of something that we're equally afraid of. What happens when the thing that you've built your identity around changes? And I can speak to that myself. It's happened to me more than once in my own lifetime. So imagine spending 30 or 40 years becoming known for one thing, like honing a skill, grooming a life that you live and you love and you thrive in, right? Maybe you're the person everyone comes to for advice, or you're an athlete, or an entrepreneur, or you're the parent, or the caregiver, or the musician. You're the one who's always strong. And then something happens and your life changes. Your health changes. Your career changes. The children leave home. The company closes. Relationship ends. Or something happens that you never would have chosen yourself. It's thrust upon you. And now let me ask you something else. Who are you when the thing you've always done or the thing that you've always identified with is no longer there? You cannot do it in the same way, or it's not possible for you to identify with it. And I think that's one of the deepest human questions that we can ever face. Who are we, literally? And as a grief educator, I've learned that grief isn't only about losing people. We grieve futures that aren't going to be. We grieve certainty. We grieve loss of our abilities. We grieve dreams that we thought we'd have, and now they're not going to be. And sometimes we even grieve the person we thought we were going to become. And what I've also noticed that most people think grief is asking, how do I get my old life back? How do I return to something? But I think eventually grief asks a really different question. Given what's true now, who are you becoming? different questions, not as easy to answer. So here's the part that I've been sitting with. People keep saying Randy Travis lost his voice, and I understand why. And physically, that's a fact. The stroke profoundly changed his ability to sing the way he once did. But I don't think that's the actual deepest truth. Because if he had truly lost his voice, why are we still listening? And if you dig into the story, what he did with a group of people, including his wife, with his music, in order to make it possible for us to still listen to him, is absolutely phenomenal. Check it out. I'm not going to go into that here, but it's an amazing story. What he did when his physical ability to sing became so impacted. And I think that people are often in those halls now, standing with tears in their eyes, simply when he walks on stage, because they're touched in a very deep way, right? And songwriters, why? They're still writing with him. And people still feel something really, well, at least I do. I'm a total fan of Randy Travis, obviously. But people still feel something when they listen to his music. And those are not responses to his vocal cords. Those are responses, I think, to a human being whose contribution is still reaching people. So maybe his voice was not ever really just his vocal cords. Maybe his voice was always something deeper, and his voice was deep. But I mean, philosophically, his voice has a different meaning in the world now. And one of the things I've noticed over the years is that we, the rest of us mortals, right, we often confuse our gift with the way that our gift happens to be expressed. And they're not the same thing. Like, your gift might be bringing calm into a room. And the expression of that gift might be counseling or teaching or parenting, coaching a team or being a leader, writing music, right? Creating art. Those are all different ways to express that state of calm, if that's what we're talking about. But if one expression changes, does the gift disappear? I don't think it does. I think we have the opportunity, I'm going to say, to discover a different language for it, a different way to express the gift in its new form. And that's incredibly hard because most of us, we become attached to form. We tell ourselves, this is who I am. I am a singer. I am a CEO. I'm an athlete. I'm a healthy person. I'm a spouse. I'm a parent with children at home. Those are identities that become so familiar and they're so intimate and powerful, right? That we eventually stop noticing that those roles we've mistaken for ourselves. And then life changes, something happens. And suddenly we're left asking, if I can't be that anymore, who am I? And one of the times that I experienced this is when I moved from the United States over to Europe. And this was before the advent of the internet or anything global. And I had no clue about the culture, the language, the traditions, the holidays, the art, the stars, the TV show, nothing. I had no identity markers. That was an experience. That was an incredibly deep experience of trying to figure out who am I without all of that. And they call it culture shock, but I actually think it is a form of grief. And I think it's one of the least understood forms of grief because there's no official end to the person we have known ourselves as, right? There's no funeral. People don't bring food. There's no sympathy cards. Like, life rearranges itself and you lose the career, or a diagnosis comes, or retirement arrives, or the divorce papers are signed, or your body simply can't do what it used to do, or you find yourself in a completely different culture. And from the outside, people often say, well, you'll figure it out. And maybe you will, obviously. But first, there's disorientation, and there's often grief, real grief around the loss, because something real has ended. Not your life totally, but a life that you thought you were going to have, that a future that you thought you were going to walk into, right? When my partner died in a tragic accident, everything everything that we had planned for, everything that we were moving toward was just simply gone, like in an instant. And as a grief educator, I've sat with people through so many different kinds of loss. And one thing I've learned is that grief is asking us to pretend that nothing changed. It actually asks us to honor what changed. Before we try moving on, before we go into building what's next. And I think especially in the Western cultures, we rush past that. We don't give ourselves the opportunity to be with the loss first. Yeah, our culture loves a comeback. We love the stories, and there's nothing wrong with those. We celebrate resilience. We applaud when people persevere and are resilient. And those things matter. But before the resilience, there's usually heartbreak. And before somebody has that courage, there's usually a point where they surrender. So before someone finds a new way to live, they often have to let go of the life that is no longer or that they can't return to. And that is not weakness, that's actually being human. That's the walk that we have on this planet. And that's what we rarely talk about. We move right through it and beyond. Which brings me back to Randy Travis. I cannot imagine what the first months or years were like for him after his stroke. Yeah, I don't think any of us can know that. And I do know that his wife and his family and friends were incredibly supportive, but he had to walk through that. And I imagine that there were often moments where he wondered whether the thing he had given his life to, music, being that performer, was completely over. And I think most of us would. And yet somewhere along the way, I think the question changed. I think he went to not can I get my old voice back, but given what I have now, how can I still serve? And again, I come back to do some research. It's amazing what he's doing with music today. So I don't know if those were exactly what he said, but I do know that there was a shift. And I've watched other people make that shift in different circumstances. And every single time that they do, something remarkable, literally remarkable, happens. And it's not because life goes back to what it was. It doesn't. But they stop measuring themselves and their future against a past that is over. It doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. Yeah. So instead they start discovering who they are today. And that's not easy. And it's a profoundly different journey. Who am I here and now? And you get to know yourself again and again and again. So I wonder how many of us have actually maybe quietly or unintentionally decided that because one chapter of our lives has ended, that our contribution ended also. Like maybe you lost the career that you loved, or maybe your body doesn't work the way it used to. Maybe a relationship that you built your future around came to an end. Or maybe you're in your 30s and life doesn't look anything like you thought it would once you've gotten here. Or maybe you're simply tired of trying to be the person that you thought you were supposed to be. And now you get here and it's like, that's not only, I'm not that person, I don't even want to be that person. And I wonder how often we actually mistake the vehicle for the destination. Because singing was the vehicle. Teaching is a vehicle. Leading a company is a vehicle. Being married is a vehicle. Parenting children who still live at home is a vehicle. Even our bodies, in many ways, are vehicles, and they're beautiful. Thank God we have them. But there's still the means through which something deeper is expressing itself, through which life is coming. And when that vehicle changes, we often assume that we've lost the destination, the place we're moving to. And I don't think it has to be that way. So over more than 20 years of working with people, I've watched this happen again and again. Someone loses the thing that they believe defined them, whether it's been from a severe illness or a company folds or a marriage ends or the loss of a child. Whatever that change is, that changes how they perceive themselves. At first, everything is disorienting because you lose your footing. You're destabilized. Makes total sense. but not because they've lost their worth. It's because they lost the structure that used to reflect that worth back to them. And those are very different things. Your worth doesn't disappear. The mirror that was reflecting it back does. And when that mirror disappears, whatever that is for you, we're literally invited into that, I think, deepest question that we can ever be asked. If no one can describe you by your profession or your accomplishments or your talents or your roles, who's still here? Who are you without all of that? And it's not an easy question, but I think it's one of the most important ones that will ever live. Something else begins to happen when we stop trying to recreate the life we lost. We become curious again. And it's not because the grief is gone. Grief may stay with us for a long time. But grief and curiosity can actually coexist. You can miss what was and still become interested in what might now come, what might now be possible. They're not opposites, they're companions. They walk together. And I think sometimes actually curiosity is one of grief's greatest healers, because it doesn't keep us stuck. It doesn't demand that we have the answers, right? It offers us to stay in relationship with our own lives the way they are now, to stay open just one more day, to ask one more question, to take just one small step. And maybe that's what I admire most about Randy Travis. It's not only that he defeated tragedy. It's not that somehow he defeated tragedy. Life doesn't work that way. And it's not that everything went back to normal, because it sure as heck didn't. But what I admire is that he stayed in relationship with his contribution, like what he's here to bring to the world. And he found another way to keep saying yes to a life that was still there, even though it wasn't the one that he'd been living, right? It wasn't the one he planned or the career he imagined where he'd go from there. And it sure wasn't the voice that people remembered. But it was still his life, and he chose to live it. And there's something, powerful and human about that. And honestly, I think that's why people are so moved when they see him today. They're not applauding a country music legend. I mean, also. But I think they recognize something inside themselves. They're recognizing that hope or the ability that I can do that too. That maybe even after a loss, there's still life for me to find and to have meaning from. So I've been thinking about this all week. What if we've been asking not the most useful question? When something changes, when an illness comes, career ends, relationship ends, when we lose some ability that we thought we'd always have, our first question is usually, how do I get that back? How do I get back to who I was? And it's such an obvious question, we don't think about, is there any other one to ask? But life literally doesn't move backward, right? And we're invited forward. There's momentum. And it's not because what we've experienced doesn't matter anymore. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't grieve it. We have every right to do so. And it's healthy to do so. But life's still moving. And eventually, whether it takes years or months, however long, another question can be asked. It's waiting for us. Not who I was, but who am I now? And I think it's a very different conversation to have. And it's not easy. And just that you know, which is why I love this community, not everybody asks these questions. But there's such a part of being alive, of being human beings, right? So one of the guiding principles of my own life has become our deepest contribution is rarely the thing that we do. It's literally the quality of our presence while we're doing it. Think about the people who have changed your life, who have impacted you the most. Years later, you probably, I'm guessing, don't remember exactly the words they said. And you might not remember the conversations or what exactly you were doing together, but you probably remember how you felt when you were with them. Yeah, you remember that they believed in you or listened to you or loved you or they stayed and they brought calm, or they helped you see things differently. Whatever they gave to you as their gift, that contribution, that matters. And it can take 1,000 different forms over a lifetime. It morphs. Actually, it usually does. So that form may change, but the contribution doesn't have to. So when I see Randy Travis today, I don't see someone who's lost his voice. Honestly, I know that happened, but that's not what I see. I see someone who discovered that his voice was larger than his singing, that his songs still matter, his presence still matters, like his story matters. And maybe even more than it did before, because now his life carries a totally different kind of music. Yeah? And it's one that reminds us that being fully human isn't about holding on to what we've imagined life to be. And it doesn't mean you give up on your dreams at all. But as things change, you can move and you can bend and you can adjust while you're still living from your contribution, living from your value. So sometimes it's about learning to love life that's still here when it changes. And I don't say that lightly. As someone who spent years not only sitting with other people's grief in my work, but also having gone through a lot on my own, I know how difficult that can be. Grief doesn't ask us to just push through to acceptance. It gives us the chance to be honest with ourselves and to honor what's been lost and to feel what's real, and then in its own time to become available to life again. And not the life we planned, but the one that's right here, right now for us to live. So I'd love to leave you with one question, as usual, right? Is there a part of your life that you've been trying to get back? Maybe it's an old version of yourself, a dream you had, a relationship you really cherished, or a career that you built for yourself, or it's your health, or simply that you used to be certain about things. And if that's true, what if you stopped asking, how do I get it back, just for a minute? What if you just asked the question instead, given everything that's true today, what is life inviting me to become now? And I don't think that those questions lead to the same place. And I don't think Randy Travis's story is ultimately about surviving a stroke at all. I really think it's about discovering that deepest part of who we are and finding the value in that and trusting that we still get to bring that forward. And we can't be reduced to a role or a job. Those things might change. The instrument might change. The stage may change. How we look or how we sound may change. But who you are, that doesn't have to change. You can become more and more of yourself, even when the circumstances drastically change. So if this conversation resonated with you, I'd love to invite you to subscribe. And every week we explore questions like these. Not because I have the answers, certainly, but I think that questions, thoughtful questions, help us live more honestly and more fully. And I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to grieve a version of yourself and then maybe discovered there was still something meaningful waiting for you on the other side of that experience? I read every one of your comments, and some of the most meaningful conversations happen there, really. So if you'd like to share your story, I'd be honored to read it. All right. Thanks for being here. And until next time, be well. Take care of each other.